Excellent. Good evening, everyone. Erev Tov and Chag Sameach. As we begin, I want to welcome all 150 of us. And for now, only the panelists can be seen and heard until a little later. If you do have any technical difficulties that we might be able to help with, please locate Marielle in the chat. I think she's listed as Temple Office, and she'll do her best to assist. So here we are at the foot of Sinai, as it were, ready to immerse in Torah. Torah as drawn through the beautiful mind, heart, and person of the late Rabbi Dr. Abraham Joshua Heschel. It's fitting that we gather Or Shalom, Temple Shalom, Beth Israel, and Harel, and Beth Tikvah across the spectrum of Jewishness to immerse in his voice, as Heschel was truly a super-denominational Jew, born into the Hasidic milieu, educated in a liberal seminary, saved from Nazi Europe by the Reform movement. He made his academic home at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and his ideas very much inspired the Chavurah movement of the 70s and onward, which in turn birthed Jewish renewal. We've called our program Build Your Life as a Work of Art. And that's because these words are the ultimate message he directed toward young people in the television interview we'll watch together tonight, filmed in 1972, just 10 days before Heschel's death at the age of 65. After watching excerpts from the interview together and hearing some discussion between Rabbi Carrie Brown, Rabbi Jonathan Infeld, Rabbi Philip Gibb, Rabbi Adam Rubin, and myself, there'll be opportunity for all of us to talk in small breakout groups about what it might mean to build our lives as works of art. For myself, as a 16-year-old, watching this program at home with my parents when it first aired, I felt that Heschel was looking directly at me and offering me advice. Build your life as a work of art. It's a touchstone of aspiration I've considered periodically in the decades since, rising above the particulars of life in the moment so that I can see the whole of who I am, and asking myself, what does this work of art that I am need to be brought to its fullest expression? Perhaps I thought Heschel was speaking to me because he was a real person in my life. He was my father's teacher and dearest friend. Not a month passed in the 30 years between 1942 when they met and 1972 when Heschel died that they did not visit with one another. Usually my father would travel to New York for a few days every month, and sometimes I'd go with him. And sometimes the Heschels would come as a family to stay for a week at my grandparents' summer compound in Lake Peekskill, New York. It was there that I walked with him and my dad in the forest and by the brook, where they didn't talk about their shared passion for the Hasidic masters, but rather about the shape of a branch, the call of a mourning dove, minute changes they noticed in the natural environment as they perceived it morning to evening or one day to the next. I remember that he was terrible at skipping stones on the water, but he was very curious about our technique, full of questions. And he was full of questions in the garden and at the table, wanting to know what plants were in the salad. They would sit on the patio and review manuscripts. I remember learning the word meter, as in poetic meter, from listening in on one such conversation. Pointing to a typed paragraph, Heschel said to my dad, "But Sam, how is the meter?" Not only did he want to master English his fifth or sixth language. He wanted his theology to read as poetry. And indeed it does. On Friday evenings, other friends gathered, and there was a Kabbalat Shabbat in the garden where I learned the Kapitchnitzer melodies, the melodies of the stream of Hasidism Heschel was born into and expected to one day lead. He chose a different life, of course, and by entering the world of Jewish enlightenment, learning the language of academia, and coming to the US as one of the few from that rarefied society to escape Nazism and participate in the bigger world. Heschel became the bridge from the old world to the new, and perhaps he fathered Neo-Hasidism, Hasidism expressed so that it addressed the spiritual longings of modern North American Jews. You'll see in the tape we watched together that Heschel looks much older than 65. He'd had a heart attack several years prior that aged him terribly and from which he never really recovered. The day after his death, the day before his death, he had insisted on traveling to Connecticut to stand outside a federal prison in freezing snow, waiting for the release of his friend, Daniel Berrigan, a priest who had been jailed for civil protest. He died that Shabbat in his sleep, with a kiss, I remember my mother telling us. I took the call, a phone call from Susie, his daughter. I remember watching my father just sink to the ground. My mother told us Heschel had died and to please go to our rooms and stay there till she came for us. In this way, she made space for her husband's grief, his keening. Later, I learned that at Heschel's bedside, the night he died, were two books. One, a Hasidic classic, the other a work on Vietnam. These, I think, reflect his worlds, the world of eternal spirit and the world of the mundane present. As my father wrote, of mysticism and diplomacy, heaven and earth. Heschel refused to ignore either, preferring to live in the tension of that polarity, letting the one inspire the other. My father mourned terribly. In working through his own loss, he wrote about Heschel's lack of fear in the face of death. After that first heart attack, he'd visited Heschel straight away, and he wrote, Heschel had gotten out of bed for the first time to greet me. He spoke slowly and with some effort, almost in a whisper. Sam, he said, when I regained consciousness, my first feelings were not of despair or anger. I felt only gratitude to God for my life, for every moment I have lived. I was ready to depart. Take me, O Lord, I thought. I have seen so many miracles in my life. I didn't ask for success. I asked for wonder, and God has given that to me. In the interview we're about to see, we see a great Jew at the edge of death, fearless and passionate, in love with life, with the people in his life, in love with his ideal of what human beings can be, still fighting for that vision and at peace with his God. Heschel concluded his first book, Man is Not Alone, with these words: the deepest wisdom man can attain is to know that his destiny is to aid and to serve. The act of giving life back is reciprocity on man's part for God's gift of life. For a pious man, it's a privilege to die. With that, let's turn to journalist Carl Stern's 1972 interview with Heschel on the Jewish Theological Seminary's Eternal Lights program. Please know that the footage is old and Zoom can render further distortions. Still, this will be special.
We know there's no sound. We're trying to fix it right now.
Art museum, and he was bewildered because no two paintings looked alike.
One of the most arresting titles of your many books would be this one, God in Search of Man. Is God in search of man?
That's a paradox. In fact, if God would consult me, I would tell him...
Does he?
He doesn't. He's too wise to consult me. I would say, why do you care about man? The biggest message of the Bible, of the prophets of Israel, is that God takes men seriously. You remember he created Adam and Eve, and they immediately failed. He was disappointed, but he kept them alive. Then they gave birth to two boys, very nice boys. I'm sure they got some very excellent education in a private school, or in a public school, I'm not sure, but certainly in a good environment. They didn't live in the slums, you know. And you know what one brother did to the other? God should have been disgusted. He said, no, I will keep the human species alive. I'm waiting. Maybe someday there will be a righteous generation. And throughout history, as seen by the Bible, there's one disappointment for God after another, and he's still waiting for mankind which will live by justice and compassion. He's in search of men. Now let me say to you, there are essentially 3 points. One, God in search of men to me is a summary of all of the Hebrew Bible. 2, it expresses the idea of Judaism about the position of man in the universe. Man is terribly important. If God is so concerned about men, which surprises me again, why shouldn't God be concerned more about, let us say, cosmic energy or the astronaut techniques? He's interested about widows and orphans in Jerusalem. My Lord, if he were to ask me, I would say it's beneath your dignity. You, God of the universe, should be concerned about the poor, about the disadvantaged. Yes, he is. Man is very important to God.
And the third?
So I want to begin by, first of all, saying, and in my reaction to these first few minutes, thank you to Rabbi Hannah. I have seen this video so often that I've almost memorized all of its words. It's my favorite video ever created. But to have your personal introduction to this interview was so moving and so meaningful, and made it so much more than just an interview and opportunities to hear from Rabbi Heschel. It made it real for all of us. Thank you. I've always been somewhat confounded by this beginning, where the idea that God is in search of humanity is so important for Rabbi Heschel. Yet when Carl Stern gives Rabbi Heschel the opportunity to speak about that idea, Rabbi Heschel takes the concept of God in search of man and essentially turns it on its head, saying that God in search of man really means that we need to live up to that ideal, that we as humanity need to connect. That is our purpose of being here. And so I always wondered, why didn't Heschel in this interview, which sort of is, as Rabbi Hannah mentioned, really his last words to the world before he passed on. And it is almost as if he knew that, and you're going to see that in the interview. But why didn't he drive this idea further of God being in search of humanity? Rabbi Hannah?
You're currently muted.
Thank you. I believe that he's speaking a bit about himself, in addition to speaking about God. You know, that there's this longing to give, and then there's also the search, the searching of those who cannot find their spiritual home. But what he's doing is reflecting the Hasidic learning from which he comes. And there's a great teaching by the Maggid of Mezrich that I think he's drawing upon in all of his work about the longing between God and man, where the Maggid goes out with his students late at night, and they're walking in the street and they come upon a little girl who's crying. And the Maggid asks the little girl, "Why are you crying?" And she says, "I've been playing hide and seek with my friends, but no one is coming to find me." And then the Maggid turns to his chassid and he says, "Oh, that's the way it is for the Holy Blessed One. God is hiding, but we are not looking for him." So on the one hand, God is yearning for us, but what God's really yearning for us is that we should come in search. And so they're reciprocal. God's search for man requires man to be seeking God and letting God in. Another great Hasidic teaching is, where does God dwell? Anywhere that man lets him in.
Beautiful. Thank you. Let's continue on.
The third point would be the nature of religion. The nature of religion is not just a longing and feeling of man searching for God. I think that God is more in search of men than man is in search of God. It gives us no rest. We have for generations, for decades, for centuries tried to refute the existence of God, as if he didn't exist. And in spite of everything, man is still searching. Man is still waiting. Man is still longing. Man has discovered and is discovering that a man without God is like a torso, a body without a head.
But man is searching also because, if you'll forgive me, there's a certain absurdity, a certain purposelessness, or perhaps undiscoverable purpose. Let me cite an example. 10 days before Martin Luther King was killed, you, as a good friend of his, addressed a convention of the Rabbinical Assembly, and you said, "Martin Luther King is a sign that God has not forsaken the United States of America." And that 10 days later, he was dead in the most cruel and purposeless fashion. It's that sort of question that challenges faith. How do you explain that?
If we understand the Bible properly, and very few people these days study the Bible properly, we atomize the Bible, we tear it to pieces. Instead of immersing in the thoughts of the Bible, you discover that God shares life with man, and he has given men freedom, a very questionable gift, and the most outstanding gift man has. Men can do anything. When the first son of the first couple decided to murder his brother, he did what he pleased, and God did not interfere.
But that raises the question, though. If you're saying that if God were to control every aspect of man's life, it would not be living, then that raises the question, why pray to God then? If God is not going to interfere, if God is not going to intervene, if God is not going to help, what is the role of prayer?
First of all, let us not misunderstand the nature of prayer, particularly in Jewish tradition. The primary purpose of prayer is not to make requests. The primary purpose of prayer is to praise, to sing, to chant. Because the essence of prayer is a song, and men cannot live without a song. Prayer may not save us, but prayer may make us worthy of being saved. Prayer is not requesting.
As I mentioned before, I've used this video often. Used it to teach in many different adult education settings. And when I was an assistant rabbi in New Jersey, about maybe even 15, 16 years ago now, I shared this video, and at this very moment I stopped to discuss the concept of why pray. And And for me, Heschel's words work very well. For me, a person who usually does not believe in or pray to a God that can move a pencil from one place to the other, or who physically engages in the world and acts in the world. I had a member of my synagogue raise his hand and say to me, and it wasn't just a member, but he was a regular. He came every single Shabbat. And he said to me, Rabbi, I'm really upset by what Heschel just said, because I come every Shabbat. You know why I come every Shabbat? And I said, I assumed it was for the social aspect, for connection to God, connection to Tefillah. He said to me, I come because I have a child who suffers from serious mental illness. And I come every single Shabbat praying that my child will be healed. And I was taken aback and felt a little upset, actually, that I had challenged this individual in such a way. But indeed, I think Heschel gives us an opportunity to understand prayer in different ways in order to be able to connect to God, in order to be able to connect to our prayer.
I find that the same as well. I think that the ways in which we as kind of contemporary Jews have figured out new modes of prayer different from kind of the earlier 20th century ways of American and Canadian Judaism is in large part because of Heschel, because he helped to open us up to a more kind of mystical or maybe spiritual experience in prayer that I think is really, really valuable. And for me personally, and a lot of what I teach as I bring kind of the teaching of Heschel into my experience of prayer and leading prayer is his idea of awe. I find that Heschel, he spoke and wrote a lot about the concept of radical amazement, that to be in an encounter with God through prayer or through just being is not about, as he said, requesting, but just being in this space of complete and total awe in the world. To be spiritual, to be a spiritual person, he said, is to be amazed. And I think that that is so moving, that this notion of being able to open our eyes to see the wonders of the divine in every little fingerprint of the world, of creation, of humanity. To me, I feel like that sense of spiritual amazement is very much comes from Heschel. So I think Rabbi Infeld looks frozen. We'll get on to the next part.
I'm still an optimist.
You first gained prominence as a scholar writing about the prophets. Is it possible for a modern prophet to come to us? Or is that just pre-biblical?
Again, Mr. Stern, your questions are very rich and very complex and very meaningful. And since time is so limited and precious, I will have to give you short answers and only partial answers. The idea of a prophet is complex and consists above all of two things, or the message or the substance of what the prophet has to say, and of some extraordinary claim to an experience which is not given to other men. Let us ignore the second, let us take the first. What's so great about the message of the prophet? About the prophet as a character. I would say the prophet is a man who is able to hold God and man in one thought at one time, at all times. This is so great and this is so marvelous, which means that whatever I do to man, I do to God. When I hurt a human being, I injure God. No, their thoughts, their message continues to be so relevant today that I venture to say, and I had this experience with many distinguished philosophers when we got together to discuss social contemporary problems, that the ultimate source of hope for all of us, whether it was a Protestant or a Catholic or a secular philosopher, was suddenly our reliance on a hope uttered by the prophets of Israel. Therefore, I would say, the spirit of the prophet, the message of the prophet is very much alive. The kind of men who combined very deep love with very powerful dissent, painful rebuke with unwavering hope. The prophet as a witness to that great mystery, or to what I would call meaning beyond the mystery, namely God, could still be alive and should serve as an example.
Are you talking about a rebirth of their knowledge in the mouths of others, or is that not to be?
No, an identification. May I make a personal statement here? I've written a book on the prophets, a rather large book, spent many years. And then really this book changed my life. Because early in my life, my great love was learning, study. And the place where I preferred to live was my study and books and writing and thinking. I've learned from the prophets that I have to be involved in the affairs of men, in the affairs of suffering men. And I would like to say that one of the saddest things about contemporary life in America is that the prophets are unknown. There's a complete decline of the Bible in American education. No one knows the prophets. There are countless intellectuals who may be great authorities on literature. I've never read the prophets really, never been touched by them. And this, I'm sorry to say, is a little bit of a disaster. The great examples we need today are the ancient prophets of Israel. I say that this book on the prophets which I wrote changed my life. And I think that anybody who reads the prophets will discover, number one, that the prophets were the most disturbing people who've ever lived. Yeah? It's not easy to read.
You mean, and they were abrasive when you say disturbing?
Abrasive, disturbing, giving me a bad conscience.
Well, are you a prophet? You've been abrasive at times, particularly concerning the Vietnam War. You've said a great deal about that.
I wouldn't accept this praise, because it's enough for me to say that I am a descendant of the prophets, which is an old Jewish statement. It is a claim almost arrogant enough to say that I am a descendant of the prophets, what is called B'nai Nevi'im. So let us hope and pray that I'm worthy of being a descendant of the prophets.
You said during the height of the agitation over the Vietnam War that it was the great religious issue. What made the Vietnam War a religious issue?
Of course it's a religious issue. What does God demand of us primarily? Justice and compassion. What does he condemn above all? Murder. Killing innocent people. How can I pray when I have on my conscience the awareness that I am co-responsible for the death of innocent people in Vietnam? In a free society, some are guilty, all are responsible.
At this time, 1 year ago, I was covering a trial of priests and nuns, the Berrigan trial in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Prospective jurors, one after another, when being questioned by the judge and lawyers, said they thought it was wrong for clergymen to be involved in politics, that their job is to administer to spiritual needs. Why don't you stick to spiritual needs?
That's a very good statement. In fact, it's such a good statement that if the prophets were alive, they would be already sent to jail by these jurors, because the prophets mixed into social, political issues. And frankly, I would say that God seems to be an unreligious person, because if you read the words of God in the Bible, he always mixes in politics and in social issues.
Chag Sameach, everybody. I'm really honored to be able to teach about one of my great spiritual heroes, and I'd like to say just a few words. Ask my co-panelists some questions about prophecy and what they think of what we just heard. I just want to raise a couple quick issues. First of all, it seemed to me that it seems to me that in the Jewish tradition, there's actually a lot of nervousness about what it is to be a prophet. That is to say, the bar is high. How do we know who is a prophet? And Maimonides famously goes into great detail about this. And the worry, of course, is that some charismatic figure will claim to speak for God and to know God's mind. And this didn't seem to bother Rabbi Heschel. That did not seem to be a worry. So that's number one. I just was interested in what you think about that. And he even seemed open to the idea that there could be, if not prophets, we're children of prophets, but possibly a prophet today. So I just wanted to put that out there. The other thing I really want to ask about is that, I've always been curious when you read Yeshayahu, Isaiah, when you read Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, it talks about the prophet being possessed by Ruach HaKodesh, right, by the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. But of course, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, doesn't go into detail about what that means. What does it mean? Are you intoxicated when the prophet is speaking? Is it God who's really speaking? So I think Heschel offers a fascinating roadmap for what that means. And for him, if I understood him correctly, it seems to be that there's, if you'll forgive the expression, a mind meld, a kind of radical sympathy between the prophet and God, such that when God is outraged by injustice, the prophet feels it deeply. Right? It's this kind of passionate sympathy between the two. And this is not the same as being almost like being possessed by the Holy Spirit. So just those two things, it seemed to be quite interesting. And then finally, one last thing is this complicated issue of politics from the pulpit, right? That if leaders are to follow our teacher, Rabbi Heschel, then that means that there's no such thing as a separate realm of politics that we leave out. That politics is part of religion, part of spirituality. But of course, we know that as soon as we enter the realm of politics, there's disagreement. And people, have different ideas about what injustice is and what policies to address it is. So that makes for a very complicated, potentially complicated life for rabbis and other Jewish leaders. So I'll just stop there. I'd love to hear what you think.
Wow, you raised so many good questions, Rabbi Reuben. That was great. I mean, I think a lot of what you brought up is really important about just whether or not Heschel sees himself as I don't think he would be so brazen as to say a prophet, but kind of in this line. I'm not sure, but I think he really seems to think that the prophetic voice, especially of rebuke, in order to, as you said, kind of have this connection to this mind meld with God, to the sense of there is like an absolute sense of justice for him, of that comes from God, that's where that stems from, and that if nobody is that is, if you are really living as a religious human being with that connection to God, that you have to call out, you have to bring that prophetic voice out into the world. Otherwise, you're not authentically being a Jew in the way in which God commands us to be.
And I think to add to that, it's in some ways interesting the way that you use the language of mind meld, where I think if Heschel were to use that, he would say it's not a mind meld, but rather it's supposed to be a melding of the hearts. That in the way he connected to his own biography, he described the way that as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, that he was so focused on study and learning. And it was after that he then had this engagement with the prophets that he realized of the way that it was supposed to be through action. And so I think that sense of, it's not the case that the prophet is someone who's supposed to have some sort of divine insight, but rather, he talks about, in the two volumes of the prophets, of the way that actually what it means to be a prophet is to be able to really tap in to God's emotions. And a lot of the work, the sort of academic philosophical work that he has to do, is start to argue that to say that God feels emotions, is not a theological problem. And one of the ways that he does that is saying, to say that God doesn't care ultimately is putting, some just unsustainable limit on God. And, that not only does God care, that God is going to be angry, but this isn't, the sort of anger that, is parodied as being the sort of Old Testament God of wrath, but rather that this is the anger that's felt really on behalf of those who are suffering. And so I think really what he then does with that, is having this idea that the Ruach HaKodesh, of feeling that sort of divine spirit, it's not this sort of, speaking, I mean, in the book of Samuel, it imagines Saul all of a sudden, goes into ecstasy, he probably dropped acid or something and he was called a prophet there. But for the prophet that Heschel's talking about here, it's the inspiration is just this overwhelming feeling of emotion, that they can't help but essentially scream out in agony at the suffering that they're seeing. And so, I think then that question of, what it means to see prophets then later. And, you mentioned Maimonides, who is a sort of medieval rationalist philosopher, that his definition of what it meant to identify a prophet was finding, the person who was able to predict something that then came true, who was able to show some sort of, intellectual insight. That instead, really what Heschel is describing, that to find a prophet is to find someone who's able to really give voice to those who are suffering the most. And so kind of the in some ways the irony here, and this is starting to go into also just recognizing the challenge of the politics, that in some ways if Heschel was trying to answer whether or not he saw himself as a prophet, in some ways the tone and just the emotion that he fills the word murder with in talking about the Vietnam War is essentially his stake, saying, I think I am, because I have the ability to bring this voice forward. And, unfortunately, it's more of the case of, first, the prophets themselves. He talks about how prophets today would be thrown in jail immediately. But, there's also no question that the prophets in ancient Israel also, were not popular people. That especially, the prophet Jeremiah, who was the one who was, foreseeing the collapse of Israel before the destruction of the temple, was essentially had his own doubts of, he's saying everyone around me is giving these words of comfort. Am I wrong then? And, unfortunately, he wasn't wrong, but it's really needing to, I think, find the truth in really adjusting our own empathy more so than necessarily our intellect. So.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I love too that. Oh, go ahead, Rabbi Dresner.
No, I'll cede to you, Carrie.
Okay. So I mean, I think I really love that. Although he's full of rebuke, he's so passionate. He's also full of hope, and he is able to see that responding to that injustice in the world can actually have impact. That he saw his role as one to bring action. So I think that's one of the ways in which we really think about Rabbi Heschel today, as we think of him as being this great icon of Tikkun Olam, of someone who's really about taking the action to help repair the world. And that also really ties with his understanding of God in search of man. I think it's not just about the doing, but that is also the theological, that is the way in which God seeks human beings to partner and to create that tikkun, that healing in the world. We can't have a discussion about Heschel without referencing his very famous words when he marched in Selma with Martin Luther King and the other civil rights leaders, and said he was praying with his feet, and that there's something about being in the world. I think for Heschel, he sees kind of his presence in that very moment of history so sharply, that he's so aware that we have the ability to make an impact, each one of us, and he kind of takes that action in such a deliberate and important way.
Thank you. Rabbi Dresner, did you want to say something?
I feel like Carrie really said what I'd like to say about partnering, that to be a prophet is to take action, to partner with God, to be God's arms in enacting God's desire for those who are suffering, and not just feeling it, but acting upon it.
As Heschel said, a prophet is one who's able to take the needs of God and the needs of humanity and bring them together all at one time. That it couldn't be said better than that.
I also just want to respond very quickly to something Rabbi Gibbs said in his famous book on the prophets, which he refers to. Rabbi Heschel makes a distinction between the Greek idea of prophecy, the Stoics, who were supposed to aspire to being without emotion, right? That emotion was seen as a bad thing, negative thing, and the biblical idea, and which I really resonated with what Rabbi Gibbs said, that there's an embrace of emotion, that God is a God of pathos, a God of feeling, and this isn't, this is not a theology of philosophers. It's I think it's a theology of a chassid, right, who's unafraid to connect the realm of feeling to the realm of spirit. So that was very important to me.
Well said. Shall we go on to our next clip?
But that is the wonder of it, the torment that man has, the problem-solving machine that he is. That, you think, is, I detect, is the essence of living a human life.
Yes, you see, and that is true. No, but you see, one of the great sins of contemporary education is to give the impression you can solve all problems, or there are no problems. Actually, the greatness of man is that he faces problems. I would judge a person by how many deep problems he's concerned with.
But is not the quest of religion, though, to give one a sense of inner peace?
Now, you have to understand the meaning of inner peace. Let me give you first an example of a person who has no problems. Let me give you a dramatic, fictitious picture. Here stands a man, and I'll tell you this is a man who has no problems. Do you know why? He's an idiot. Because a man has problems. And the more complicated, the richer he is, the deeper are his problems. This is our distinction: to have problems, to face problems. Life is a challenge, not just a satisfaction. And the calamity of our time is to reduce life to pleasure only. I'm not against pleasure, but the greatness of life is experience in facing a challenge rather than just having satisfaction. I would be frightened if I were to be ruled by a person who is satisfied, who has the answers to everything. In a very deep sense, religion has two things. First of all, it's an answer to the ultimate problems of human existence. And it also has another side. It is a challenge to all answers. It is living in this polarity of these 2 points.
But there are so many religions that say, come to us and you will have no problem. We will solve your problems. Here's the word of God. He will solve your problem. You don't accept that.
No, I don't accept it because it contradicts everything I have learned about life, from experience, from philosophy, from history, from the Bible. If I look at the Bible, God is full of problems. Imagine, he created man. He created man on his own will, out of his own freedom. And man is a problem to him. Look at the Bible. God is always wrestling with the problem of man. Even God has problems. This is a deep ingredient of existence, problems. And the tragedy of our education today is we are giving such easy solutions. Be complacent, have peace of mind, everything is fine. No, wrestling is the issue. Facing the challenge is the issue.
Would it be a better world if we were all of one religion?
No.
Would there be less strife?
No. As far as I can judge, and I try to judge God's will from history, it seems to be the will of God that there would be more than one religion. I think it's a very marvelous thing to realize. You know, if I were to ask the question, whether, the example I think I gave you before, whether the Metropolitan Museum should try to introduce that all paintings should look alike, or I should like to suggest that all human faces should look alike, how would you respond to my proposal?
I would be against it.
I'm glad. We agree.
I think also, though, in your writings, you've indicated that even where one religion has been adopted in the state, there's no evidence that that has brought any happiness or any new high points of religious feeling. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I think it is the will of God that there should be religious pluralism. One of the most
Right. So something that's worth noting is, again, Rabbi Heschel, in really living throughout in America during the 50s and 60s, was one of the first mainstream religious leaders who was really involved in interfaith work. That during one of our preparation calls, that really kind of at that time, the word ecumenical, which for us, is so focused on having, kind of any religion that you're able to bring in, at that time, really mixing was really around the racial question. Of course, Rabbi Heschel was deeply involved with the civil rights movement in America. But at least in this passage, in describing the way that he, in some ways of having that sense of really appreciating the way that different religions are able to have different contributions, and that it really is about sharing and appreciating differences that you're able to one day right now can because it's currently closed. So that you can go from appreciating Impressionism wing to the classical wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, that you need to have both in order to have an understanding. And so at least one of the things that brings up for me is, in some ways what it meant, at least for Rabbi Heschel, to really, in leading the world, in going to the University of Berlin, and there, in getting an academic degree, did his study on the prophets. And so, one of the things that I take from it, and something that we are doing, is to manage to say that much of the goal seems to be absent from the sort of class American culture at this time. On one hand, I think we're now appropriately nervous about the way religion sometimes appears in the public sphere. But at the same time, I think we're able to have appreciation of the sort of deep human truths that our tradition has that we're then able to share. And so some of that challenge, I think, is knowing what it is to, I think, approach it from the sort of academic approach, which is something that I think is more open to anyone, and then being able to speak really as a person of faith. And so I want to ask Rabbi Rubin, who both spent time as an academic as well as choosing to be a rabbi, of the way that changed.
Thank you, Rabbi Gibbs. I think I got your question. You were breaking up a little. I don't know if I was the only person to hear that, but it's what are you going to do?
You were not.
Okay, good. Okay, so it's true. I was for over 10 years an academic and left that world to become a rabbi. And it's interesting going back to the earlier clip of Rabbi Heschel. That he said that he essentially implied he could have been a very happy academic, right? He was doing his research on his early book, The Prophets, and it changed his life because as he studied, right, as he sat in libraries and archives and was working in German and so on, he his connection to the prophets themselves essentially drew him out of the library and out of the academy and into the problems of life. And even though he taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary, he was an academic. He was obviously also an activist and became very involved in contemporary issues like the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. For my own, lahavdil elef havdalot, to make 1,000 distinctions, I would just say that for myself, I find his model very, very inspiring. And without going into details, I also felt, one of the main reasons I left academia was it felt to me to be somewhat isolating, and isolated from the concerns of the community, the concerns of the world. Now, they're amazing and wonderful academics, and I have great respect for the work they do. But that I really related to what he said. That really resonated for me in my own experience. I wonder, Rabbi Gibbs, what you think. I thought it was quite amusing when he said somebody without problems, essentially somebody without problems is an idiot, right? That is to say that that being challenged and having problems, is again part of the religious life, part of our spiritual life, and that there's this distinction between, I think, if I remember correctly, between what he calls satisfactions, right? Pursuing satisfaction and pursuing ends, right? Pursuing important goals and ends. And I think he didn't say it explicitly, but I think what I get from him is a rebuke, a kind of prophetic style rebuke of, complacency, materialism, consumerism, and an embrace of something higher, which is rooted in facing and confronting our problems, and not, hiding behind, I guess you'd call it, sort of temporary satisfaction, of needs in the way that, advertising seeks and so on. I wonder if does that make sense? Do you think that that's something that am I capturing what he said accurately, do you think?
First, I'm going to ask, is my microphone better?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. It's a Shavuot miracle. I think the first thing with that is, he also said he's not against pleasure. He's not against having things that are enjoyable with life. Probably the difference between him and a true prophet is he was able to find some joy in life as opposed to always being hounded by troubles. But I think you're right in that he is trying to make a distinction between things that ultimately are going to matter and the things that, are really going to be fleeting. And, is having that difference of imagining someone who has no problems. That it's, I think the danger of seeing, and again, you can blame consumerism, you can blame advertisement, you can, blame many things, but ultimately it's the danger of not wanting to use those things to just simply, cover up both, again, the sorts of emotional holes in ourselves, as well as, the wider societal problems that, as he mentioned before, it's our obligation, or, it's our goal in trying to imitate God that we're always able to be empathetic to. Perhaps we don't need to do it every single moment of our lives, that we still need to have moments of joy. And again, he talked about how prayer is, really daily moments of joy, but really, ensuring that we're not using that experience to just simply cover up, the things that we can help within ourselves as well as within others. Rabbi Dressner, did you have something?
I think he's also talking about religious and spiritual complacency, that it's not just the person who has all the earthly goods that they might want and, they don't feel like they have any problems because they live a charmed life, but it's also those people who take their spirituality into just the realm of personal spiritual satisfaction. I can rise up, I can have an epiphany, I can be on a high spiritual rung. But the mystical and Hasidic milieu that he is transmitting in this contemporary way is that the point of that rising is to be able to come back down. and use what you learn through your spiritual life to open outward and help humanity and practice Tikkun Olam.
You're right. I have to say that I often think of this part of the video on difficult days. On a difficult day, I think to myself, why did I choose this job? This congregant is calling me, this person is calling me, this person's upset with this, and Rabbi, the heat is on too high, or whatever the case might be, are obviously something much more difficult than that. And I think, and I always think of those words. It just hits me, those words that a person who doesn't have any problems is an idiot. And I think to myself, what is he really saying? He's saying that we who strive to live a life of meaning, we naturally have problems. If we are going to engage in the world in a meaningful way and do something that changes the world in a significant way, there's going to be someone who doesn't like what we do. And for me, it's difficult to, I strive to make everyone happy, but ultimately Heschel reminds me that if you're changing the world, if you're really making a difference, that's not possible. And while Heschel says that the point of religion is to make you uncomfortable, I have to say that his words in this video have often brought me comfort in challenging times, knowing that I'm doing the right thing, because life isn't always easy.
I wonder too about, and we'll get into this a little bit in the final segment, but I mean that kind of critique of what Rabbi Hannah, you were talking about, of kind of the religious complacency, how that has kind of transitioned from 1972 until today. I would say al achad kama v'chama, like all the more so, there is, even more religious complacency, or even more of that sense of kind of personal spirituality that's not connected with any particular tradition or wisdom, historical wisdom, etc. What would Heschel say about our world today? Would his critique be the same? Would it be? To me, it still seems to resonate, but I think we've kind of moved even farther from, the place that he was worried about.
I wonder what he would think about, with social media and just the ubiquity of screens and the distractions of them. Something tells me it would provoke his prophetic passion. Let's just say that.
At some point in the video we're not watching, I think he does say that he does buy a color television. So he did take the first step.
He actually, Rabbi Gibbs, says, the part we didn't hear, I said, it's not enough to just have a TV. Everyone needs a color TV. And saying, that's not really true.
I think the place that resonates for me in this, going back to what Carrie was asking, is, we put a premium on meditation, let's say, contemporarily, as a way to sort of, have some equilibrium and allow problems to sort of be aware of them, but let them sort of float and be. And I think he would take us back to our Hasidic and mystical roots, which the Institute for Jewish Spirituality does do, in saying that the reason we pray, the reason we meditate, the reason that we want to find these moments of spiritual bliss or equanimity is so that we can be wiser, so that we can relax into what we actually really know deep down to be the right thing and to act on it.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Well, let's watch our final clip now.
We have just about a minute or so left. I should say at the start of this hour, before we began this hour, Dr. Heschel indicated an interest in directing a message at young people, and I don't know that I ever in the past hour gave you the chance I promised you that I would give you.
I would say to young people a number of things, and I have only 1 minute. I would say, let them remember that there is a meaning beyond absurdity. Let them be sure that every little deed counts, that every word has power, and that we can do everyone our share to redeem the world, in spite of all absurdities and all the frustration, all disappointments. And above all, remember that the meaning of life is to build life as if it were a work of art. You're not a machine. When you are young, start working on this great work of art called your own existence. And the best way, one of the ways of doing it, or two ways of doing it, is one, remember the importance of self-discipline. Second, study the great sources of wisdom. Don't read the bestsellers. And third, remember that life is a celebration, or can be a celebration. There's much of entertainment in our life. And entertainment is destroying much of our initiative. It weakens our imagination. What's really important is life as celebration. In a very deep sense, I would say that the addiction, the drug addiction, which so many people suffer, is due to the fact that man cannot live such a shallow life, stale. He needs exaltation. He needs moments of celebration. One of the most important things is to teach men how to celebrate life.
You talked earlier of slanders. May I give you an example?
So it's very interesting that the video, the few minutes that started the video we didn't watch together, was Heschel reflecting a little bit on his own youth, on how he didn't have a lot of extracurricular activities or sports or things like that he did, but he found he had what he needed, and he learned so much from his experiences as a boy and a young man. And he ends this video here with this this directive to the youth, to the young people of 1972, with that beautiful directive to live your life as a work of art, which was what we titled this evening's gathering on. We all found that to be such an inspiring way to think about our purpose in life. We want to now open this up to all of you. We have it says 165 people gathered here with us, and we're so delighted that you're here. And we're going to ask you to think about that statement that he made, to think about what does it mean to you to live your life as a work of art. We know many of you who are gathered with us today were the young people of 1972 that Rabbi Heschel was addressing, and so maybe you want to reflect on that, or perhaps you have a question that this interview has brought forth within you. So we're going to ask, if you would, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a button that says Q&A. If you would type in your questions to the Q&A, we are going to invite all of our panelists to respond to some of the ideas and questions that all of you have. And we're going to invite Rabbi Dan Moskowitz to help to moderate this part of our evening.
Thank you, Rabbi Brown. If we could ask all of the rabbis to join us back on screen. They're stuck in the parking lot. So as we're waiting for questions to come into the queue, and we're sorry that we didn't have the ability to do the breakout groups as we had planned, but let me pose that last question to each of you briefly. What does it mean to you to live your life like a work of art?
Can I say that I don't speak that?
It sounds like Rabbi Rubin wants to begin.
Well, thank you for that. No, I think at least one aspect of that is, living an examined life. That is a life that is in which I strive to be deeply conscious of how my deeds impact the world, impact those who are close to me, and I noted. I think it's interesting. He said, entertainment's, there's too much entertainment. People shouldn't read bestsellers, right? They should read, I think he said, essentially like great books. And there's something about really pushing and probing for meaning, and living in a way in which I'm constantly doing cheshbon hanefesh, kind of self-examination, which I think is very important. It's part of life as a creating a work of art. If a work of art is about a sense of craft and a sense of inspiration, then I think that's a very important thing, an examined life.
Anyone else? Having a chance
Well,
to talk about it,
I've
Rabbi
spoken about it a little bit, but I could elaborate a little bit. He talks about discipline, and for me, that is a very important aspect of creating anything, to sort of learn my craft, whatever it is, and immerse in the classics of the disciplines that I need to learn to do my building. I think of it also as a kind of a rising up, as I mentioned in the introduction, and having a little bit of a bird's eye or a God's eye view of who I am or what my life looks like. Take a look at it and see what's missing, see where it's dull, see where it's weak. And then also to ask myself, like, what is the point? What is the point I'm trying to make here? And finally, I think he gets at this in so many different ways. If at the end of my life, this is what my gift to God will be, what I've done with my life, is it a good present? Have I created something that would please the Creator?
Lovely. Rabbi Infeld. You're muted. There you are.
So Heschel says that we are to think about every action and in the framework of whether or not we are advancing or slowing down the act of redemption. Every single thing we do, he says, we have to put into that idea and ask ourselves, is this act better for the world or not? And for me, those words become really some of the words by which I live. And yet I also know, and when we talk about art, let's think about what art is. Art is not objective. You can't say that I can look at a painting and say, I love this painting. And someone else looks at that painting and says, what are you talking about? You have no taste. And the reality is that I do have taste. It's my taste. And that's the meaning of art. So I may think that I am indeed bringing about redemption through this particular act, whereas someone else sees my act in a different way. But it's my art. And so I have to understand my art from my perspective and hope and pray that indeed what I'm doing is the right thing in order to bring about redemption, and also hope that other people see that act as a piece of beautiful art as well.
I'll give you all the opportunity to continue to answer that, but I also want to go to some of the questions now in our queue. Amy asks, she begins with, art can be deliberate and disciplined, or it can be wild and random, or it can be improvised within structured parameters. Is Rabbi Heschel, as we interpret him, suggesting that we choose how we create our lives amongst these extremes? Rabbi Gibbs.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ideas that, I think he mentioned, and part of it was, through this metaphor of, would you want to walk into the museum and see every single piece of art being the exact same, or would you want every single human face to be identical? That I think, what he's recognizing within the parameters of art is that there is going to be difference. And that, part of it, I think, it is also seeing the streams of influence, of seeing really the very human hand of, what it is to create. That, anyone who's been in my apartment for a meal would know that I do pottery because I show off and use, my ceramic dishes to serve food. And, that also gives the experience that, every time I drink a cup of coffee, I'm doing something with something that I made myself that I see as, a small work of art, which on the one hand is very lovely, but on the same time, is also incredibly clear of every single mistake I made while making this object. That I think, part of what it is to see life as a work of art, is both recognizing that sort of aspirational idea of the beauty we're trying to create in it, as well as, appreciating that the mistakes and the flaws that are part of it are being able to be, the next steps in being able to continue it on. And, I see a follow-up question here of saying, what part do you feel beauty plays in art? How do you see beauty? Again, I think there's times where there is also other art that's sometimes about being ugly. And sometimes the ugliness is being able to put up a mirror to our own, sense of needing to change what's happening around us. And so part of that is still, within that larger realm of art. And hopefully I think we're able to appreciate what both are able to bring us, as well as, hopefully being able to use it to see a path forward of the way that we're able to improve.
Anyone else want to talk on that topic? Because there's another question I want to raise.
I'll just say one thing. I think there's something too about art being an honest lens through which an artist views the world, or an artist can be seen in the world in a way. And, good art, Rabbi Infeld talked a little bit about kind of the subjectivity of art, whether it's good, depends on the eye of the beholder. But I think for any given artist, their best pieces of art are ones that really kind of show their true emotion, their truest self. A great artist can throw something together quickly, and it doesn't necessarily have the same effect of something that's really coming from within them and with their full emotion or experience or feelings. And I think that for me, that directive to live our life as a work of art is also about to live it with the fullness and that lens of honesty in the world, that we are able to both see the world through our eyes, but also be seen by the world. And that both of those are really important.
Thank you, Rabbi. Jonathan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, but just before quickly, I want to speak to Rabbi Gibbs that your statement about that there's often a flaw in a pottery that you made. It reminds me of the fact that we're supposed to leave, when we build a house or we paint a home, we're supposed to leave a little bit of it not completed as a zecher Beit HaMikdash, as a reminder of the destruction of the temple. But I wonder maybe if it's something else, and it's a reminder of the fact that nothing in life is perfect, and that even if we look at our home and see our home around us as a piece of art that we've built, there's still always that little piece that's left imperfect, because nothing can ever be exactly as we want it.
I apply that same mitzvah to IKEA furniture. I always leave a few extra pieces just to remember the Beit HaMikdash. So there's a question in our queue that speaks to some of the frustration. We're moving on now from the art metaphor to some of the frustration of the incrementalism of change, that where Heschel speaks about prophets and their grand designs, and then we as human beings in our in our mortal nature may do lots of good things, but it doesn't seem to make the kind of grand change, the sweeping change that's referenced in the prophetic works, and that seems to be called upon for Tikkun Olam and those kinds of things. How would you speak to that? That frustration is what's being asked of us by Heschel grand? Is it small? Is it realistic?
Can I say a quick something about that?
Of course you can, and then we'll go to Rabbi Stein because we haven't heard from him yet either.
Oh yes, absolutely. So just quickly, I'd say
it was really striking to me that he, at the end, when he was speaking to young people, he insisted that every single act matters, right? Every act, a kind act, a just act. And I think this is in some ways a deeply Hasidic idea. And, just the Jewish idea generally, that essentially God is in the details, and that everything we do has real significance. So I just say that, first of all, that's, it may not be grand, it may not, overthrow governments and radically change policy, but it still matters. And second, he was an activist. He marched, but he wasn't a political revolutionary, meaning he hoped to change the world through activism. And that means, putting pressure, demonstrating, marching. So somehow I see this beautiful harmony between passionate involvement, commitment, and hope for change, but also a recognition of the importance of democracy, and a recognition that there's debate and difference, and we live within that system. So I don't know. To me, that it was a meaningful kind of harmony to me.
Rabbi Stein, and you'll need to unmute.
Rabbi Dan, I think the question you might be referencing was one that someone wrote in about. Someone said, I've helped lots of people, I've spread a lot of love and light, but I don't know if it's really worth it. I don't see these people. I don't know if the connection is still there, if it was worthwhile. And I think about that sometimes. If you look around, even just the panel of rabbis here, the number of students or wedding couples or families with babies or people who've had funerals, and all sorts of people whom we have influenced over the years as rabbis or before being rabbis, and people watching. If whatever you do in your life, the people you've influenced, it's an amazing number of people who have been influenced positively. And the fact is always there that rarely do we, unless we're in a really unique situation, we rarely find out if it's more than a few weeks or months later what that positive influence was. Once in a while you run into someone and you find out about that influence that you had. But we heard that Rabbi Rubin was a professor before he was you're still a professor, but before he was a rabbi, and for 10 years he influenced people who were training to become rabbis or an undergraduate program or a graduate program. And you could just go around North America and just quiz people and say, well, tell me about something influential that Professor Rubin said, Dr. Rubin said in some class, just like you could find some bar mitzvah kid 10, 20 years later and find about something that was influential during that process from some teacher or some rabbi, whether it was at a school or a synagogue or a nurse or whomever. And I think it's hard to really internalize that, but it's good to remind ourselves of that sometimes, that those people are out there who were influenced, even though we don't always hear about it.
Mm-hmm. So we only have a few more minutes. There's one more question that's not in the question queue. It came through the chat. Well, there's a couple of questions there now. But one of them that sort of leaps out is that, Heschel was I've always looked at this interview as kind of an interview with God. It is so remarkable to listen to this man and to not have lived in his lifetime, to be able to be invited into that is just incredible. So I'm going to modify the question that came. The question that came was, who might Heschel say are today's modern day prophets? And that's a huge question, I guess. But who are the voices for you as rabbis, for us as a Jewish community, that you think speak with the ability to shape the debate, to shape the focus of our community in the way that Heschel still does today, and certainly did at the time? Five rabbis and nobody talking. That in itself is a Shavuot miracle. I'll offer one just to get you thinking, and then Rabbi Brown looks like she's ready to say something too, which is that I remember when Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs came to our community, and the way that he brought all of the various corners of our community together into Sharet Tzedek that weekend was really, I think, in some ways for us to hear granted, it's a different time and it's framed a little differently, but a version of a prophetic voice. He's certainly spoken about, amongst the spectrum of Jewish practice as having a unique and important perspective for our time. Rabbi Brown.
I was going to say one of the contemporary rabbis who I think is, speaks as a descendant of the prophets is Rabbi Sharon Brous from Ikar in Los Angeles. I just find, whenever I listen to her or I read her writing, it's just speaking, I mean, I don't think anyone can fill Heschel's shoes, certainly, but, of what is our calling and our purpose and what's demanded of us to pursue justice in our world today from a very authentic Jewish voice, and I really admire her.
Anyone else want to give it a try? Rabbi Gibbs.
I guess, despite being the youngest, I think I'm going to be the most cynical in this moment.
You're right, as the youngest.
Usually it's the other way around. That I think it's like, I don't know if it's possible for someone to really be able to speak with that, or I mean, I think probably so many people are able to speak with that depth of empathy of people who are suffering. But ultimately, and again, you can talk about political polarization, you can talk about the way social media, is able to create, certain echo chambers. But I think it's just far too easy for that voice to just get, stuck and either, be speaking to the people who already agree. And in that way, where it's able to be an inspiration to take more action, it is able to tap into that prophetic voice. But, it's like, I am very scared that, there is no space to essentially have that inspiration that's able to really change someone, and to be able to set someone on a new path. And, it could be possible, but right now, it does feel, so there's a few questions about how much social media, like, would Heschel have, 1,000 or not 1,000, would Heschel have, millions of Twitter followers? But at the same time, it sounds like the work that he did, came from a certain quiet authenticity that was able to be amplified through action. And I think in a lot of ways, we live in a society that really is much more about, the actions of branding, of needing to like hire a PR person, which apparently was a controversy for the city. That you need that to be able to actually be heard. Which I think really makes it harder for the people who are doing the most authentic work to be able to break through the noise.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the reasons there has been silence is because it's, as Rabbi gives, it's difficult to think of a person who can be involved in politics and yet simultaneously rise above politics in order to be the prophetic voice. And in fact, even, I deeply appreciate and love Rabbi Sacks' books, but we know that even Rabbi Sacks has been mired while he was the chief rabbi in England, was mired in politics, and it was and he was tainted a little by that infighting in which he would have been potentially the unifier of the Jewish people when he was actually in the position. He was somewhat divisive actually, and so
as was Rabbi Heschel in his day.
Right.
The reference that Rabbi Brown made to the March in Selma, his response was to a criticism of what are you doing there and not in synagogue, and Peter praying.
And I often think one of the things that I think made it a little easier for Rabbi Heschel is granted there were politics at the Jewish Theological Seminary where he taught, but he wasn't involved in synagogue politics, or and that made it slightly easier for him. I've often wondered if Rabbi Heschel and Tommy Douglas met each other, because Tommy Douglas was a minister and came out of religious milieu and involve themselves in politics in order to affect literally the daily life of every single human being in our country, literally every citizen of Canada, to ensure healthcare. And I often think maybe this was Canada's prophetic voice that we needed, and it had to, that political decision and to give everyone healthcare, to provide healthcare universally, had to come from someone who came out of religiously the same Louis Heschel. So I don't know if the two of them ever met, but I'd love to see that conversation if they had.
I just want to say
just another minute there for you, Rabbi Reuben.
But just very quickly, I just want to echo something that Rabbi Gibbs said. So I think I'm the senior member on this panel right now. I was 7 years old when Rabbi Heschel was in that interview. I didn't see it, when it first came out. But one of the things that struck me is the video quality of it. Reminded me that back then there were only 3 channels, something like that, 3 or 4 channels on TV. And I think that I just want to echo what Rabbi Gibbs said. I think the prophecy today is hindered by the 500 channels on cable TV, all of the different social media, that there's a fragmentation that I think prevents a kind of clear message that prophecy relies on. There's just so much, a sea of information. So I think that's a real problem.
And I guess
thank you all. We're just at 9 o'clock now, and we're going to do our best because we know we have a Mari service to get to in a half an hour led by 3 rabbis, so that in itself will be a challenge. But I do want to take this opportunity, and I want to ask Rabbi Dressner to come back on screen as well if she can, to first thank all of you for participating in this project together. We just began this last year when we started to do this communal Tikkun Leil Shavuot, and this is our second round in the midst of a pandemic, but in some ways it lent itself to us really being able to be together during the holiday, and to have 200 almost people from our community be able to study and learn with us and us with them has really been wonderful. I want to thank all of our congregations, our lay leadership for supporting us and supporting this endeavor. I know behind each of us is a whole team of support staff and volunteers that make it possible still, even in our remote locations, for us to do our jobs. And none of what we do would be possible in our community without the help and support of the Jewish Federation of Greater Vancouver. We thank them for their partnership as well. We now transition, and I guess I want to thank one other thing, and that is I want to thank our spouses and our children, some of whom have made their way onto screen throughout this evening. We generally leave our homes to go do our jobs, and now our sacred work, which is always in our homes, is also sacred work that we do for our community in our homes. So they're very much a part of the support system behind us. And if they're not on screen, it's because they might be watching our children so we can be on screen. So I want to thank them as well. Or they're right over there, right, Rabbi? Like that way, I guess. So let us then transition, if we can. I'll invite the panelists to turn off their cameras. We're going to transition to the holiday and to our Mariv service, beginning with the lighting of the Yom Tov candles, which I happen to have right here. See if we can get enough of them on screen to make this work. Let me close a few things here so I can make that happen. I know I should have used matches, but this is what I have. So if you will join me in the blessings in your homes. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lechadlik ner, shel Yom Tov.
Amen.
Amen.
Let's
I
come
have
to
to
the
move
next.
these or I'm going to burn. So I'm just going to move them over here.
Let's come to the next screen, please. And the next. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. And our blessings give us strength and make our visions clear. And our blessings give us peace and the courage to dare. As we bless the source of life, so we are blessed. Let's please move on. Evening, the evenings, evening the frayed edges of our lives, Ma'ariv, Aravim, Amen. Sacred words, even the evenings, wisdom opens gates locked around our hearts. Asher bidvaro, Ma'ariv Aravim, Bechokma Poteach She'arim. Evening, the evenings, evening the frayed edges of our lives, Ma'ariv Aravim, Amen. Understanding alters with the times, changing seasons, cycles divine. Uvitfuna neshane itim umachalif et hazmanim. Evening, the evenings, evening the frayed edges of our lives. Ma'ariv, Aravim, Amen. Paint diamonds on the canvas called sky. Soothe our souls with a lilting lullaby. Umesaderet hakochavim v'mishmerotehem barakia kiratzono. Evening, the evenings, evening the frayed edges of our lives. Ma'ariv, Aravim, Amen. Rolling, rolling into the night, rolling, rolling away the light. Golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, v'choshech mipnei or. Evening, the evenings, evening the frayed edges of our lives. Ma'ariv, Aravim, Amen. Spirit of the night, we bless your name. Eternal light, eternal flame. El Chai v'Kayam, Tamid Yimloch Aleinu. Le'olam va'ed. Evening, the evenings, evening the frayed edges of our lives. Ma'ariv, Aravim, Amen. Baruch atah Adonai, Hama'ariv, Aravim. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. We are embraced by arms that find us, even when we're hidden from ourselves. We are touched by fingers that soothe us, even when we're too proud for soothing. We are counseled by voices that guide us. We are counseled by voices that guide us, even when we're too embittered to hear. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. We are supported by hands that uplift us, even in the midst of a fall. We are urged on by eyes that meet us, even when we're too weak for meeting. We are loved, loved, loved by unending love and unending love. Embraced, touched, soothed, and counseled. Ours are the arms, the fingers, the voices. Ours are the hands, the eyes, the smiles. We are loved by an unending love. Baruch Ata Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. V'yahavta et Adonai Elohecha, v'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol ma'odecha. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher anochi mitzavcha hayom alevavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'derech u'v'shochbecha u'v'kumecha u'kshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot bein einecha uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvi she'arecha.
We continue on now with the second paragraph of the Shema, if you'd like to read along. והיו לטוטפות ביניכם ומתם אותם וכתבתם על זביתך כמי השמיים על הארץ. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם אותם ונתנו על ציצית הכנף פתיל תכלת והיה לכם לציצית וראיתם אותו וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר אתם זונים אחריהם למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם. ואמונה כל זאת וקיים עלינו כי הוא אדוני אלוהינו. מלכנו הגואלנו מן הכפוריתים עלינו. השם נפשנו בחיים ולא נתן למות רגלינו. אמונה We continue on. Hamadrichino b'amor oivenu v'amkaninu kol soninu mazin. Baruch anav gurato shibu hodu lishmo. Umalchuto baratom kiblu aleihem. Moshe u'Miriam uvnei Yisrael lachanu shira. B'simcha rabah v'amru chulam. Mi chamocha belim Adonai. Mi kamocha neder b'kodesh. Norati lo tosefele. Malchut acharu vanecha. Bokei am lifnei Moshe. Zeli anu v'amru. Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. V'ne'emar kifet Adonai et Yaakov. Ugialo miyad chazak mimenu. Baruch at Adonai. Gal Yisrael. We continue on now to Hashkivenu, a blessing really expressing the difficulty and the fear in the nighttime when it is dark. Please join me in your own homes if you know the tune. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leShalom v'hamidenu malkeinu lechaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leShalom v'hamidenu malkeinu lechaim. Ufrosalim kashmacha v'takneinu v'tzatim v'amecha v'osheinu l'man shemacha v'hagem b'adenu. V'aser me'alenu oyev dever v'cherev v'rav v'yagon v'aser satan v'chanenu me'acharenu ki el melchanu rachum ata ushmor seitenu uvoenu lechaim u'shalom me'ata v'ad olam me'ata v'ad olam. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leShalom v'hamidenu malkeinu lechaim. Ufrosalim skachmacha. Baruch at Adonai, haporesu kat shalom aleinu, ve'al kol amo Yisrael, ve'al Yerushalayim. And you can join me in, we'll just read these words together. It's not Friday night, so we don't do Vishamru, but this is a biblical verse instead of Vishamru, but for festivals. By Daber Moshe et Moedei Adonai el Bnei Israel, Moses proclaimed the festivals of Adonai to the people Israel. So I'm going to stand where I am now in my home, and I invite you to stand where you are, and we're going on to the silent Amidah for festivals. If you have a prayer book with you, you'll notice we've been using images from prayer books from our different movements. If you have one of those prayer books on the screen there, you can find the Festival Evening Amidah on page 470 if you have the Mishkan Tefillah. If you have the Lev Shalem Siddur, this red one, page 306, you have the 8 Ratzon that is used at Or Shalom, page 166. So we'll give some time now for the silent Amidah, and we thought it'd be nice during this time, we'll show for a little while each 5 pictures of some places that we know so well and hope that we can be back there one day soon, our shuls.
Thank you, Rabbi Stein. We want to take a moment to just reflect on the holiday of Shavuot before we enter into Aleinu. I wanted to share a reading from the liturgist Alden Sullivan, who was a scholar in residence here in Vancouver just a few years ago, and who wrote the following poem, To Hear Your Voice. Divine voice of reason and love, of compassion and understanding, speak gently and clearly so that I may know your will. Give me the patience to listen and the desire to seek your counsel and instruction. Grant me the understanding to hear your teachings in every voice, from all people, in every moment of need. Open my heart to others, to their suffering, to their call for help. Open my heart to love and laughter, song and dance, beauty and grace, so that I remember to celebrate your gifts day by day. Divine Creator of spirit and light, teach me to hold my joys and sorrows gently in my hands, and to honor them both. Teach me to present to all that I see and all that I feel, to be present in truth, without fear. Teach me to be present for others in humble service. Blessed are you, teacher and guide. You make your wisdom known to those who ask, and those who listen, willingly and patiently, to the voices of your creation. Amen. Aleinu calls upon us to take all that we have said and all that we have prayed here and to take it out into the world and to do it. To not let these words just be on our screen or even just in our hearts, but as Abraham Joshua Heschel taught us, to pray with our feet and with our hands. And so we'll rise in our hearts or in our homes, however you choose, for Aleinu. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'teit gdula li'otzeh breshit, shelo asana kahei amlachot. That's not the right paragraph. We'll go to another one. Sorry. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'teit gdula li'otzeh breshit, shelo asana kahei ha'aratzot, v'lo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kachem, v'gohor aleinu kechol hamonam. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. Next slide. שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד ארץ ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל וכשינתו זו בגבי מרומים הוא אלוהינו אין עוד אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו ככתוב בתורתו וידעת היום וחשבות אל לבבך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. We therefore hope in you, Adonai our God. May we soon behold the glory of your might, sweeping away the false gods of the earth, that idolatry be utterly destroyed, perfecting the world under the rule of God, that all humanity invoke your name, turning all the wicked of the earth toward you. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. We take a moment to remember loved ones who are not with us, but whose presence is felt throughout this community. We think at this time particularly of those families that are midst of Shiva and Shloshim. We know the difficulty that there is in the midst of this pandemic to only be able to gather virtually with our expanded circle of friends and family, and how important those moments of connection, even virtual as they are in guiding us through our grief and our mourning. As a community, we mourn together all of those that we have lost, as well as all of those who died in defense of freedom and justice, victims of terror in this land, the land of Israel, and around the world, those who have died in this pandemic, and as we recall also those who died in the Shoah that have no family left to remember them, we recall them for blessing as well. I invite you to call out the names of your loved ones so that you give voice to their memory in your hearts or in your homes. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divrach rutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayachon v'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, b'agalav izman kariv v'yimaru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lomei olmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudesha brichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, daminron be'alma v'yimaru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'yimaru amen. May the source of peace and peace to all who mourn, and comfort all the bereaved in our community and amongst us, and we say together, amen.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol am, v'romamanu mikol hashon, v'kidshanu b'mitzvotav. V'titen lanu Adonai Eloheinu b'yava, moadim l'simcha, Hagim uzmanim lesason. Et yom chag hashavuot hazeh, zman Toratenu, mikra kodesh, zecher litziat mitzrayim. Kivanu v'acharta be'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, umoadei kadshecha, v'simcha v'sason, hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh.
L'chaim.
Yantiv.
We wanted to invite all of the rabbis to come back up on screen just so we can wish our community together a Hag Shavuot Sameach. And maybe if we can stop the screen share at this point. Oh, we're going to do Motzi. Sorry, I forgot.
I'll do a quick hand washing here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Amen.
Shikoach.
Shikoach. We wanted to thank everyone who joined us as the numbers are slowly declining as people are getting ready for their evenings, their bedtime. Before you all go, just to thank you again on behalf of the Rabbinical Association of Vancouver and for the Federation of Greater Vancouver for their support. I won't speak for all of my colleagues other than to say thank you to all of my colleagues, and I'm sure the thank yous are coming back as well. What a wonderful evening.
Thank you all for
And
being
we want to thank Susan Quigg for helping to coordinate everything during the service. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. And Mariel Solan, who's behind the scenes, was dealing with some of the technical issues on our end as well.
Beautiful.
Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Wonderful Shavuot.